Ego death. The moment you look in the mirror and the person staring back feels like someone you used to know, not someone you are, not someone you recognize, someone you once inhabited, the way you once inhabited a childhood bedroom that now belongs to a stranger. You are standing in your own life and none of it feels like yours. Your name sounds borrowed. Your opinions feel like furniture someone else arranged. The goals you chased for a decade suddenly look like obligations written in a language you no longer speak. And the terrifying part, the part that brought you here tonight, is that you cannot go back. You have tried. You have tried to care about the things you used to care about. You have tried to laugh at the jokes that used to land. You have tried to want what you used to want. And every attempt feels like putting on a coat that belongs to someone 3 sizes different from you. It does not fit. It will never fit again. And no one around you understands why. Carl Jung had a name for this. He had lived through it himself. And what he discovered was that this feeling, this specific terror of becoming unrecognizable to yourself, is not a breakdown. It is not a malfunction. It is the most important thing that will ever happen to your psychological life. And if you leave this video before I explain why, you will keep interpreting the most transformative experience of your existence as evidence that something is wrong with you. Before we continue, welcome to Carl Jung Decoded. This is a side of psychology that most people never explore, but these ideas deserve to be understood. I may curious, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments, and it helps us build a community of people who believe these ideas can change lives. Now, let me take you inside what is actually happening. What you are experiencing has a precise alchemical name. The old practitioners of transformation, the ones Jung studied obsessively for decades because he recognized they were mapping psychological processes in chemical metaphor, called it the nigrido, the blackening. It is the first and most devastating operation. It is the moment the lead of your constructed identity begins to decompose. And decompose is exactly the right word, because that is what it feels like. Something inside you is rotting. Something that was solid is becoming soft and dark and unrecognizable. And you can smell it, not physically, but psychologically. There is a stench to identity death. It smells like meaninglessness. It smells like the sudden absence of motivation. It smells like waking up and having no reason to get out of bed that feels authentic rather than performed. But here is what Jung understood and what almost no one will tell you. The nigredo is not something that happens to broken people. It is something that happens to people whose psyche has matured enough to begin the real work. Your unconscious has decided, without consulting your conscious preferences, that the person you have been is no longer adequate for the person you are becoming. And it has initiated demolition. Think about that for a moment. Your own psyche has turned against your identity, not because it hates you, but because it has outgrown the container you built. Let me explain what that container is, because until you understand the architecture of what is dissolving, the dissolution will feel like madness. Jung distinguished between the ego and the self. These are not synonyms. They are not even close. The ego is the center of conscious awareness. It is the I that you refer to when you say I think or I want or I am. It is the manager of your waking life. It organizes your preferences, your social roles, your self-image, your narrative about who you are and why you matter. The ego is the curator of a museum called me, and it has spent your entire life carefully selecting which exhibits to display and which to hide in the basement. The self, in Jung's framework, is something far larger. It is the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious combined. It includes everything the ego has rejected, suppressed, denied, forgotten, and never encountered. The self is the entire building. The ego is one room with the lights on. For most of your life, you have lived in that one room. You decorated it. You memorized its dimensions. You knew where every piece of furniture sat, and you called it reality. You called it me. What is happening to you right now is that the walls of that room are dissolving, and you are being exposed to the rest of the building for the first time. And the rest of the building is vast, and dark, and unfamiliar, and it does not care about your preferences. This is why you feel like a stranger. You are not losing yourself. You are discovering that the self you thought you were was a fraction. A carefully curated, socially acceptable, survivally useful fraction. And that fraction is no longer sufficient. Your psyche is demanding that you meet the rest. Now, I need to walk you through what this actually looks like from the inside, because the experience has a specific phenomenology that almost no one describes accurately. The first thing that dissolves is preference. The things you loved, you stop loving, not gradually, even though it has been building for months or years beneath your awareness. Music that moved you now sounds like noise. Food you craved tastes like obligation. People you adored feel like strangers wearing familiar faces. Hobbies that defined your weekends feel absurd. And the most disturbing part is that nothing replaces them. You do not trade old loves for new ones. You enter a vacuum, a preference vacuum. And in that vacuum, you start to panic, because preference is how the ego orients itself. Without preference, the ego has no compass. And an ego without a compass does not know who it is. This is the first death, the death of what you wanted. The second thing that dissolves is opinion. Your convictions, the beliefs you would have argued for passionately a year ago, begin to feel hollow. Not wrong exactly. Hollow. Like someone scooped out the emotional substance that once gave them weight. Political positions, spiritual beliefs, moral certainties, aesthetic judgments, they all begin to feel like borrowed clothing. And you realize with a kind of nauseous clarity that many of your strongest opinions were not yours. They were inherited. They were absorbed. They were adopted because they kept you safe within a group, within a family, within a relationship. They were survival strategies dressed up as convictions. And now that the ego is weakening its grip, the survival strategies are losing their camouflage. This is the second death, the death of what you believed. The third dissolution is the most frightening. Your relationships begin to feel unreal. Not bad necessarily, unreal. You sit across from someone you have loved for years and you cannot locate the feeling. It is as though the emotional cord that connected you has been unplugged from your end. You still know intellectually that you love this person, but the knowing is cognitive, not felt. The warmth is absent. The automatic resonance is gone. And in its place is a kind of transparent distance, as if you are watching your own life through glass. This is not cruelty. This is not you becoming cold. This is your psyche withdrawing its projections. Let me explain what that means, because it is the most important thing Jung ever wrote about relationships. Jung observed that we do not experience other people directly. We experience our projections onto other people. We project our unmet needs, our unlived potentials, our shadow material, our anima or animus, onto the people around us. And then we relate to those projections as though they were the person. Your mother is not just your mother. She is your mother plus every unconscious expectation, wound, and archetype you have layered onto her since birth. Your partner is not just your partner. They are your partner plus the anima or animus projection that turns them into the carrier of your soul's unlived life. What happens during ego death is that these projections begin to retract. They pull back from the external world and return to the unconscious, where they originated. And when that happens, the people around you appear for the first time as they actually are, unadorned by your psychological projections. And they look different. They feel different. The relationship feels different. Because it is different. You are seeing reality without the filter of unconscious need for the first time. And reality without that filter is disorienting. This is starting to make sense of something you have been unable to articulate, something that has been sitting in your chest for weeks or months. Then stay with me. Because what comes after this dissolution is the part that changes everything. And it is the part that almost nobody reaches because they turn back too soon. The fourth dissolution is narrative. Your story about yourself begins to crumble. The story you have told at dinner parties, on dates, in therapy, in your own head when you cannot sleep. The story of who you are, where you came from, what happened to you, and why it matters. That story starts to feel like fiction. Not because it did not happen, it happened. But because the meaning you assigned to it, the emotional architecture you built around the events, was constructed by an ego that no longer exists. The story was true, the meaning was invented. And now the meaning is falling away, and you are left with raw events and no interpretive framework. This is devastating, because humans are narrative creatures. We do not experience life as a series of disconnected events. We experience it as a story with a protagonist, and the protagonist is the ego. When the ego dissolves, the protagonist dissolves, and the story collapses into episodes with no connecting thread. Jung himself went through this. Between 1913 and 1917, after his break with Freud, Jung entered a period he later described as a confrontation with the unconscious. He heard voices. He saw visions. He lost the ability to read academic texts because they felt meaningless. He built small stone structures on the shore of a lake like a child because the adult frameworks of meaning had collapsed for him. He wrote in memories, dreams, reflections that he felt as though he were losing his mind, and that the only thing that kept him grounded was the fact that he had a family and a practice, external structures that held him in place while the internal structures were dismantled. What Jung was experiencing was his own ego death, and what he discovered on the other side of it became the foundation of analytical psychology. The entire body of work that you and I are discussing right now, archetypes, shadow, anima, self, individuation, it all emerged from the wreckage of his old identity. He did not discover these ideas through detached academic study. He discovered them by living through the demolition of his own ego and documenting what he found in the rubble. This is the part that matters for you, because the rubble is where the gold is. In alchemy, the nigredo is followed by a stage called the albedo, the whitening. It is the moment when the blackened material begins to clarify, when the dissolved identity begins slowly to reorganize, not into the same shape, into a new shape, a shape that is not constructed by the ego's preferences and fears, but by the self's deeper intelligence. And this is the crucial distinction. The ego builds identity from the outside in. It asks, what does the world need me to be? What will keep me safe? What will earn me love? And it constructs a self in response to those questions. It is a survival self, a strategic self, a self built for approval. The self builds identity from the inside out. It does not ask what the world needs. It asks what is true. And the truth it discovers often bears no resemblance to the strategic identity the ego spent decades constructing. The self might discover that the career you built is someone else's dream. The relationship you maintained was a shadow projection. That the personality you performed was a survival adaptation from childhood that calcified into a permanent mask. And here is the painful beauty of it. You cannot reach the self's truth without first dismantling the ego's fiction. You cannot build the real house without demolishing the false one. And demolition is loud and dusty and terrifying, and for a while you have nowhere to live. That is where you are right now. You are living in the demolition. You are standing in what used to be your life, and the walls are down, and the roof is gone, and you are exposed. And everything in you is screaming to rebuild quickly, to grab the old blueprints and reconstruct something familiar, anything just to stop the exposure. Do not do this. I need to say that again. Do not do this. The single most common mistake people make during ego death is premature reconstruction. They feel the terror of formlessness and they rush to fill it. They adopt a new identity, a spiritual identity usually, or a rebellious identity, or a minimalist identity, or any identity, just to stop the free fall. But a premature identity is just a new ego. It is another room with the lights on, surrounded by the same dark building. And within months or years, the psyche will dissolve it too, and you will be back here, disoriented and frightened, wondering why it keeps happening. Jung's instruction was different. Jung said, sit in the nigredo. Stay in the blackness. Do not rush to the light. Do not manufacture meaning where meaning has been stripped. Let the void be void. Let the absence be absence. Let the question of who you are remain unanswered, not for a day or a week, but for as long as it takes for the answer to emerge on its own from the depths. This is the hardest psychological act a human being can perform. Harder than confronting the shadow. Harder than integrating the anima or animus. Because it requires the ego to tolerate its own death without resistance. It requires you to be no one, to stand in the center of your own life with no title, no narrative, no preferences, no compass, and to not run. And yet, if you can do this, if you can stay, something begins to happen in the silence. It starts almost imperceptibly. A feeling that is not a thought, a direction that is not a decision, a knowing that does not arrive through logic. It is the self rising through the ashes of the ego, offering not a new identity but a new center. A center that does not depend on external validation because it was not built by external demands. A center that does not waver when challenged because it was forged in the fire of the Nigredo. A center that does not need to be defended because it is not a construction. It is a discovery. People who have undergone genuine ego death and emerged on the other side share certain qualities. They are quieter, not withdrawn, just economical with their energy. They care less about being understood and more about being honest. They have a tolerance for ambiguity that makes other people uncomfortable. They can hold contradictory truths without needing to resolve them. They laugh more easily, but at different things. And they have a quality that is almost impossible to fake, a kind of ground-level stillness, as though they are standing on something solid that other people cannot see. That stillness is the self. It was always there, underneath the ego's frantic construction. You did not create it. You uncovered it by letting everything else fall away. Now, I want to speak to you directly, because I know what you are feeling right now if you are in this process. You are feeling like the world moved on without you. Like everyone else has a direction and a purpose and a self, and you are the one standing still in the wreckage, unable to explain why you cannot just get it together. You feel broken. You feel like you have failed at the most basic human task, which is to know who you are. You have not failed. You are in the most sophisticated psychological process your psyche is capable of initiating. You are undergoing an ego death. And the fact that it hurts, the fact that it is disorienting, the fact that nothing makes sense, that is not evidence that something is wrong. That is evidence that the process is working. Dissolution is supposed to feel like dissolution. Demolition is supposed to feel like loss. The Nigredo is supposed to be dark. Your only task right now is to stay, not to fix, not to rebuild, not to become. Just to stay present in the formlessness and trust that the same psyche intelligent enough to initiate this demolition is intelligent enough to know what to build next. Jung wrote that the experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego. He chose that word deliberately, defeat, because the ego does not surrender willingly. It does not hand over the keys to identity graciously. It fights. It bargains. It fabricates emergencies to reassert control. It will tell you that you need to make a decision, get a new job, start a new relationship, move to a new city. Anything. Anything to stop the stillness. Because stillness is where the ego dies. The ego will do anything to avoid its own death. Let it die. Not because the ego is your enemy. It is not. The ego served you faithfully for decades. It kept you alive. It navigated you through dangers and demands that your undeveloped psyche could not have handled alone. Honor it for that. But recognize that its time as the center of your psyche is over. The self is emerging. And the self needs the space that the ego has been occupying. This is what transformation actually looks like. Not a breakthrough, not a revelation, not a peak experience on a mountaintop. It looks like a woman who cannot explain why she cried for 3 hours over nothing. It looks like a man who sat in his car in the parking lot for 40 minutes because he forgot why he was going inside. It looks like someone staring at a wall, not in despair but in a kind of bewildered emptiness, knowing that something enormous is happening and being completely unable to name it. That is you, and that is enough. The disorientation you are feeling is not the problem. It is the solution. The confusion is not blocking your transformation. It is your transformation. Every moment of not knowing who you are is a moment when the self has more room to emerge. Every preference that falls away is one less brick in the ego's wall. Every relationship that feels unreal is one less projection standing between you and direct contact with reality. You are not falling apart. You are falling together into a configuration that your ego never planned, because the ego could never have imagined the self. The room cannot imagine the building. The wave cannot imagine the ocean. The ego cannot conceive of the totality that contains it. But you are about to meet it. Not because you figured something out. And because you performed the right ritual or read the right book or found the right teacher. But because you stayed. You stayed in the darkness when everything in you demanded light. You stayed formless when the world demanded a shape. You stayed honest when a comfortable lie was always available. If any part of this describes something you could not put into words until now, this channel was built for exactly this kind of work. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the psychology we explore here is not designed to comfort you. It is designed to show you what is actually happening inside you, so that the next time the darkness arrives, you will recognize it not as an enemy, but as the architect of everything you are about to become. And the next time someone asks you who you are, and you feel that pause, that hesitation, that inability to answer quickly and cleanly the way you once could, do not panic. That pause is the most honest thing about you. It means the old answer died, and the new one is still being born. And birth, as anyone who has witnessed it knows, does not happen on a schedule. It happens when it is ready. And you, whether you believe it yet or not, are closer to ready than you have ever been. Sit in the rubble. The architect is awake.